Well, thank you. uh,
If you would like to go ahead with the Policy 500 introduction, you are free to do so.
sure. I should probably share my screen, but there's someone else currently sharing.
Yeah, sorry, one sec. I will switch that over.
Do I have host privileges again? So I should keep an eye out.
I do now.
Okay. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
All
Okay.
good.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, Board of Directors, for listening to my proposed revision of Policy 500. This one would replace the one that is currently on the BUSU website that was referred to at the ISA appeal. So just so you're aware, anything in red is pretty much revised or added in to a policy that the previous clubs manager was working on and putting forth to the Board of Directors. But due to the timing of their new job from this previous job, it didn't go through. So I've been working on the base of that policy to form this policy. So this one would, I would hope, anticipate to be effective by this September. So the table of contents are the main headings of what is listed in the policy, with a club conflict section added towards the bottom. I can send over a copy of this policy if Kaylee hasn't already sent one, but I believe she has, to the Board of Directors after this meeting as well. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to go over the items in red, as they're the ones that are the most different from the previous policy. So the club's policy is interpreted by the VPSS and the club's manager. I added myself in there as a position. In terms of the first definition of active member, I wanted to abolish the club membership fee rule, as we already collect a ton of money from students through the club's levy, which is around $4.50 something per credit. So it is quite a bit of money that is used towards club initiatives, and sometimes it doesn't even get all used throughout the school year, especially with the pandemic. We barely touched it in comparison to previous years. So in order to abolish that rule, we would have to define what is an active member, as the club membership fee allowed members to distinguish who would get a voting right during club election season. But without a membership fee, we would need some sort of definition to prove what is an active member in order to give them a ballot during election season. So in this case, we decided that an active member is a Brock University undergraduate student who participates in at least 70% of club meetings. We classified events and activities not an active member, because you don't necessarily have to be a club member to go to a club event. This policy also encompasses graduate students, as last year we were given permission to ratify graduate student clubs. So some of the terminology will have graduate and undergraduate listed in this policy. So for the purposes of funding, only graduate students pay into the club's levy, undergraduate students pay into the club's levy, so only they will benefit from club's funding. This is a repeat of the same definition as a general member. This line here, the defining what negative actions are, is just to add in GSA as part of this policy. Anything with and/or GSA, I vetted this through them as well, just to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to ratifying graduate student clubs. And so I've added in any policies applicable to them there. Graduate students have to be vetted through the GSA in order to ratify, so they are well aware of the GSA policies when it comes to ratifying clubs under their name. Scrolling through to club membership, this is where most of the decisions change when it comes to membership fees, because the previous policy outlined that only fee-paying members would be given a ballot during election season. So in the policy here, it lists club members may pay an annual fee, but that's based on the club's decision. Clubs may find that it's better to charge an annual fee in order to offset some of their club costs, but I'll leave that up to the club executives to decide, and they would have to indicate that on the ratification form as well, just so we know that fees are being collected. Fees must be collected and stored within BUSU or within Scotiabank, both of which I oversee, just so I know that the fees are managed and handled according to policy. In terms of membership, I copied exactly what an undergraduate membership is for graduate students, but I felt that they needed their own section just so they know exactly what to read in the policy when it comes to graduate student memberships. If I am speaking too fast, please let me know. Oh, and thank you, Robert, for indicating the surplus in the chat as well. Okay, so the club guide, as part of ratification, clubs must submit a club guide, which essentially outlines what the positions of the president, the vice president, and the treasurer do. I felt that the club guide also needed to include rules and expectations for club members. For example, the Pride Club. The Pride Club might talk about some sensitive issues as part of advocacy, and that is something that they probably want to disclose to their members upon joining their club. So it'd be helpful to include that in the club guide to potentially avoid conflict, and so all the members are well aware of what to expect when they join this club. Of course, this is overseen by myself and the club's team when they go through ratification. In terms of club executives, I've changed up the section a bit to say that the three main positions that should be in a club at all times are the president, vice president, and treasurer. And that clubs cannot have more than 50% of its members be executives. So for example, a club of 10 people, they cannot all be executives. There should be some distinguish between who the executive team is and who the members are. And the same rules apply to graduate students. Of course, GSA will be verifying their status as part of ratification to ensure that they are graduate students. As part of being a club executive, it is important if membership fees are collected, that they're used in a manner that benefits all club members, not just club executives. And that if any position were to become vacant at any time, they would need to hold a by-election approved by the club's manager in order to fill that position. That happens in some cases where some people are only with us for a co-op term and they adjourn. So then a by-election would happen with their current membership list. The duties of the club president is responsible for mainly the financial management alongside the treasurer for their club, and that any approved club funding must be used in a manner that benefits all the club members. Moving down to the ratification process, I wanted to indicate exactly when the ratification process happens, so specifically in the month of October and the month of March. However, I would like to move forward with making ratification easier for clubs. So if the club wants to ratify outside of these periods, it's just a matter of reaching out to the club's department to see what we can do. In turn, I hope that we can make ratification all year round, so a club doesn't have to wait maybe 3 to 4 months before they can officially ratify under BUSU. A little bit more of definition on what clubs need to be or should be. So recreational nature, they cannot duplicate what is offered by Brock Sports. This was a bit of a gray area because as clubs are not too sure exactly what is classified as a sport club versus a varsity sport. Clubs cannot duplicate what is offered by Goodman School of Business as they already have their own programming. And clubs cannot ratify for personal gain or the purpose to be inactive. We want to advertise the clubs as much as possible. And if the club ratifies and they're not even active, it is a bit discouraging for, say, a brand new student who might actually want to participate in that club, but then finds out that they're not actually doing anything. In terms of ratification, a club wouldn't have to run an election if they're just forming, but they must have a predetermined president, vice president, and treasurer/secretary. Going through, oh, Austin, do you have a question?
Yeah, so can you go back to the section on the recreating like varsity teams spot?
This one right here?
Yeah, or like the box sport. Just to clarify, how does that affect like clubs that say like some of the dance clubs? There's like a varsity team, but then there's also some of the like just casual dance clubs. Like does that affect them at all?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I did some research into this. So I didn't understand how Brock Dance, the club, could exist when we had a sport team. So Brock Dance, the club, is allowed to exist because there's not an intramural team for dance. So varsity teams are meant for tryouts, and then athletes go on to compete. Pardon if my language isn't there, I'm not very well versed in sports. And then intramural teams are for recreation and fun. So you don't necessarily have to be good at soccer or know anything about soccer to be on an intramural team. So that's why Brock Dance is allowed to exist, because you might not have made the varsity dance team, but doesn't mean you still can't be part of dance. So for example, I had a club who wanted to form a pick-up soccer team. However, I couldn't ratify them because we already have a varsity soccer team and an intramural team. And so when it comes to programming and space for these sport clubs, priority isn't for clubs, unfortunately, it is for the varsity and intramural teams. So we're already competing with limited space for these clubs. So when it comes to anyone who wants to do sports or something that Brock Sports already offers, I encourage them to go that route before they try to ratify a club because of those restrictions. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thanks, Glenn.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So in terms of this section, I just added in a little bit more clarification, like ratification is online, as it's been online for a few years now. Active members as part of the membership list. Oh, I see another chat. Oh, okay. I didn't know that, Ben. I can definitely make that correction. They're association clubs. Thank you for pointing that out. In terms of the de-ratification procedures, it was not very clear in the last policy exactly what would classify something for de-ratification. As you're well aware of the issues that we faced over the past year, I want to be a little bit more specific on when de-ratification would be applicable versus when removal of a member, for example, would be applicable. So there is a BUSU code of conduct that is in the works. I don't have information on that just yet, but when I do, that would be something that would be going to the board to review anyways. And the code of conduct would essentially outline the rules and expectations for club members. So more on that in the next coming months when I have a little bit more information on that. I added in, well, when discriminatory and or violence or harassment affect safe operations of a club, as if someone is discriminatory, it might just be a one-off situation versus if it affects the whole club and its day-to-day operations, that is a different story than potentially one time of bullying online, for example. So I wanted that to be a little bit more specific. Scrolling down here, I just added copyright infringement of the GSA logo. Is that something they expressed as well? Oh, there's another question. Hannah, I guess that's in response to what Ben had to say. I guess in terms of just clarification of what Goodman is, I'll put the full name of what the entity is known as. Notice of de-ratification, again, I wanted this to be a little bit more specific with writing a formal letter. Okay. How many days to expect this letter? Exactly what is need to be done by the executive members. And if there is a de-ratification hearing, the names of the people must be communicated to the BUSU Clubs department. This is all very specific steps that if we were to ever go through another de-ratification procedure, I want to be very black and white on exactly what to expect and what is needed to be done in order for this hearing to go through. I also included an appeal section that wasn't stated before of if a club feels that they weren't treated fairly or would like to appeal the decision that is made by CPC, they would do so to the board of directors. CPC's job is to oversee funding requests, but also ratification and de-ratification of clubs. So nothing should ever be fast-tracked to the board of directors when it comes to anything related to clubs, unless expressly stated by the board. When it comes to removal of a member, this section was also very scarce on exactly what defines removing a member. So I included similar policies as you see in the de-ratification procedure. Because sometimes it's not just a matter of the whole club needs to be reevaluated. It might just be one or two members of the actual club. And so similar to the de-ratification procedures, if they violate any of these policies, it would move on to the steps of a removal of a member, which is then listed down here. Oh. Okay. This is all pretty much the same from the last policy, except again, a little bit more specific on when notices need to be delivered, what type of warnings will be sent out. Sorry, my computer is a little slow to scroll here. And of course, adding in a little bit more detailed of who can be present at these meetings, and anything needs to be communicated to the clubs department beforehand. Okay, so funding. Funding is only available to undergraduate students, which I had to state here. In terms of what we were following for the model last year, any funding requests under $1,500 can be reviewed by myself, and then any amount greater than $1,500 will require scheduled presentation to CPC. That helped a lot in terms of ensuring that funding is distributed as fast as possible, because CPC can only handle 1 to 2 requests at a time, depending on the scope. And so someone who only requests $100 for their 4 club events throughout the semester might have to wait a whole month to get an approval. And so keeping it under $1,500 really speeds up the process. And any decision I make in terms of funding, it always refers back to the policy to ensure that it's used to benefit all club members. I also added here that CPC reserves the right to request for a second presentation to go to the board of directors for secondary review. If there was any amount that may be absorbent to what is requested, we can go to the board of directors to request for another presentation. But anything that is such a large amount, I would hope that the club requests that way in advance in order to go through all those approval processes. But I am confident in the clubs that they do their due diligence to submit these things before they need them. A little bit more about the funding. Just wanted to make sure. 13A. Okay, let's go back to 13A. So 13A is essentially just outlining that funding is only available to all undergraduate, I guess I should put the word student in there. Because essentially with ratifying graduate student clubs, they unfortunately do not pay into any sort of club's levy. So there's no funding through BUSU or the Graduate Student Association for the club initiatives. However, they're still welcome to fundraise or get sponsorships, but unfortunately they cannot apply for club funding. So I just want to be a little bit more specific on who is allowed to apply for it. So far we have only a couple GSA clubs, so I don't see it being a huge issue, but I want that to be in the policy. Oh, yes. Thank you for the correction, Carly. I will just remove that. Okay. All right. Thank you. So with funding, I always want to make sure that they have a completed and approved risk management submission. Clubs should always be doing that, regardless if they're requesting for funding or not. And that I also wanted to include that they can seek permission to open up a club Scotiabank account for their club funding outside of applying for club funding. So this would be membership fees if they decide to collect them. I wanted to outline the reimbursement system, as some clubs are a little bit confused on what exactly gets reimbursed or what they can even buy for the club events. So clubs can only be reimbursed for funds that were approved by CPC or myself. They must adhere to the administrative policies outlined by BUSU. Clubs cannot contact anyone outside of the department to request for reimbursement. Those who overspend on money will not be reimbursed for the remainder of the funds. Those who request for reimbursement for funds that were not approved by CPC or the club's manager will not be reimbursed. I think I accidentally copied that same line for this one, so I will remove that. Any clubs who request reimbursement after the deadline will not be reimbursed. Same thing for alcohol or any non-approved substances. I put this in because I want to make sure this to set the expectation that there are deadlines and that clubs need to adhere to these rules. And we want to help clubs with all of their events and funding requests, but they also need to meet us halfway and ensure that they're getting their requests in a timely fashion, and that all these things are handled by a small team. And so, and to make things easy for all of our administrators to really outline exactly what is expected for clubs when it comes to funding and reimbursement. This part here is just to include GSA, again, with the policy, as I wanted to confirm with them what exactly is expected of GSA clubs. And in terms of club responsibilities, I also want to outline that if a club executive leaves, their duties will be absorbed by the rest of the executive team until their position is reelected using the election policy, which is what I'm going to go through right now. The main chunk of the election policy is that the only positions that need to be elected are president, vice president, and treasurer/secretary. Any additional positions can be added if given permission by the club's department or myself. And these can be decided by the club. So for example, if they want an events coordinator, they just let me know that they're adding a position and they can add someone else onto the team. I have made it this way because we have had many issues in the past, even before my time at BUSU, is that elections have not been well conducted or haven't been conducted at all. So to make it easier for the clubs, maybe a little bit work for the club's department, all the clubs must use simply voting in order to host their club election. And so to make it easier for the administrators as well, the 3 core positions need to be voted in always. So went through the simply voting form, all the clubs have to do is upload whoever wants to run for president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary. as long as with their bios and headshots, and we will conduct the election for them and then export the results to them once their election concludes. So the election policy here just outlines exactly how long nominations need to be open for, when they need to submit their simply voting form. Also include a neutrality clause that a member who is running in the election cannot hold an election review position. So for example, my 2 clubs coordinators, if they were involved in a club, I would not have them conduct their club election. I would do it, and again, in order to stay neutral. Clubs cannot endorse executives during either BUSU or GSA elections and should remain neutral for all candidates involved. There were some issues with that last year. Thought I'd add that into the policy as well. And to run in a public election, I said that you must be a member for a club for a minimum of 1 full semester prior to the election. This is just to ensure that if you want to be an executive on the club, you have a little bit of experience prior to running for one of those executive positions. This again goes into detail about what to expect for simply voting, that all elections would be virtual, so posted through social media, and then you get the ballot to your student email. Clubs can still have meetings to talk about the candidates for the election, but no voting should be taking place there. And then results will be collected and sent to the club by the BUSU Clubs Department. And then, of course, further defining active and or paying members have a right to vote in the executive election. And so with the election, even with all these plans in place to make sure that the clubs run smoothly and the longevity of the club outlasts their first year, the CPC reserves the right to place sanctions on the clubs who violate Clubs 500 policy. So I made a little note here. This club conflict section is something that we worked into the BUSU Club's Code of Conduct. Again, because club conflict, there is no policy that can give a full definition of what defines conflict and or what actions need to be taken when conflict arises. But for a general overview for now, until the Code of Conduct is moved forward, any issues beyond the scope of this policy will be directed to Human Rights and Equity for support. And I have contacts and or resources for students who feel that they might need to seek that extra support. In terms of our role at the Clubs Department, we'll take the necessary steps to mitigate the conflict, provide suggestions, resources, and written documentation acknowledging the conflict and working to provide a solution for the members. And then similar to this policy up here, the BUSU Clubs Department in conjunction with the CPC reserves the right to place sanctions on the club where club conflict has affected the safe operations of the club. Okay, that takes me to the end of the policy, and I probably have sped through that, but I do open the floor to questions, and I encourage you to take your time reviewing it because it is quite a lengthy policy, but I feel that everything stated in here needs to be addressed somewhere. If not on the BUSU website, it is on the policy. James, is that an indication that I'm done? Oh, it's a clap, okay. Oh, thank you, thank you. Okay, I will stop sharing my screen for now. Oh, Faison, do you have a question?
Yeah, I actually did. It was kind of like in the middle where you said that for instance, you're a Goodman, like you know how Goodman is like a business school and like they have their own club and whatnot. What if they're doing something in terms of like entrepreneurship or something? But wait, hold up, let me rephrase. They're not doing anything, okay, but you want to do something with entrepreneurship, right? And whatever it is when I asked last time, I actually tried to start a club as well before with something to do with entrepreneurship, but just because of the word entrepreneurship was in there and business, they're just like, no, we can't do that because of Goodman, right? And like the thing is that they don't really do anything, even if you look at like their accounting stuff and whatnot. So how are we gonna go about that as per your policies?
That is a great question, and In terms of the statement here, they cannot duplicate what is offered by Goodman. That is true. You cannot have two of the same club. However, I think this is an issue that does need to be addressed as a whole, because there are students out there who might be interested in entrepreneurship, but they're not in a business degree. And I feel like they should be given an opportunity to learn outside of the classroom. So it's something that I'm working on with Lauren Smith, who is their clubs manager on their side. I want to see exactly what can a business type club ratify under, and how do we make sure it's not infringing on what they're doing, but also give opportunities to students who aren't involved in Goodman at all. So that is something that I am working towards, and I don't see it not becoming a thing over the next year or so. But as of right now, it should be included in the policy that they cannot exactly duplicate what is offered by Goodman, because those students do pay into a Goodman clubs levy fee. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Celine, it does partly answer my question. Is it possible for, like, I guess, like, maybe we could have the meeting or something later and talk about the policy a little bit more, or amend it later on a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. Because I mean, the student voice also matters, because if there's a high enough demand for clubs that fall outside of Goodman, I would
Because
love to ratify them.
it just sucks because they didn't do anything right for the past two years, and like just because of the word entrepreneurship and like business, all of a sudden the whole club is not allowed to operate, right? That like they can be ratified, and like I don't know, I just think it's unfortunate because we're literally like a lot of our students are business students as well, and we have a lot of potential in the school. It's a lot of businessmen in the school and women and people. So the thing is that we should be able to, you know, allow people to make their own clubs regardless. It shouldn't be duplicated. Like I don't say that there should be like duplicates of every club or whatever. I'm saying like maybe maybe they can operate around or like on a lower level, you know.
Yeah, for sure. And this is something we can revisit, of course. Like everything that I put forth in this policy, I don't expect it all to be approved over the next month, but I am trying to make changes to improve the club system. But yeah, I would love to see more business clubs ratified that fall outside of Goodman, especially because our rules say that you don't have to be in any program to be part of a club. So for example, the Psych Society, you don't have to be in psychology to be part of that society. So yeah, I'm hoping that that conversation with Goodman goes well, and that in the future we could definitely ratify those clubs outside of their scope. Anyone have any other questions? Or Faison, do you have any last minute comments?
No, I think we're good. Maybe I'll just have a chat one-on-one with you, and maybe we can come up with a couple of other solutions as well.
Yeah, I'm definitely open to hearing your ideas and suggestions, so we can move forward with something. I see there's some conversation in the chat, but Mark, do you have a question?
Yeah, just regarding to 15.9, just wondering what like our plan of action was in the event that, say, because we've said that it's mandatory that the club has 3 executives. So what if a club is unable to get a 3rd executive outside of a student who has been in the club for less than a semester? If we're going to allow it in instances like that or not, or what the plan is there, so we can get ahead of any issues.
Yeah, so I actually had this issue with Brock Musical Theater, and so I would just coach them through the process. So it might be a matter of just doing a little bit more training with someone who might be interested in the position but hasn't been part of the club. We want to essentially exhaust these steps first before we go to just recruiting any member. So we want to make sure that the election is open or recruitment is open for a position. If no one in the club steps up, or perhaps they're all graduating, we then outsource and see if there's anyone else who wants to participate in clubs. And if they acknowledge that they do, but they haven't had much club experience, at least we have someone who has a passion for it, and that we just need to train them a little bit more. These rules are mainly just to ensure that the elections are conducted fairly, but I have come across some clubs who are literally begging for someone to step up to the plate because they're all graduating. So it really just depends on the status of the club. But that's why we're here to help guide them through the process.
Okay, yeah, that was the same concern that I had, but good to know we've already planned through everything. Okay, thank you.
No, thank you.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Robert, go ahead.
Lynn, maybe you want to talk about next steps. What is your next plan for bringing this forward for consideration by the board?
Oh, sure. So I outlined with Kaylee that you have the rest of the month until your next board meeting to make a decision, and I don't expect a decision to be rushed anyways. So in where the policy currently is where I would expect review of, minus the few mistakes in spelling of association and whatnot. But there is the BUSU Club's Code of Conduct that the legal team is working on putting forward. However, I didn't want to delay getting the policy revised because some clubs have expressed that they didn't want to collect membership fees because they're under the impression that it's still mandatory. So at the next president's meeting in September, I would be proposing the policy, letting them know of the important changes that at least that they need to know now. For example, like the membership fee collecting. Yeah, until that code of conduct comes out, I don't have any updates on that end, but when I do, that is something I'll just put forward to the board, and it would go under the section of club conduct. Does that answer your question, Robert?
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ben, you have a question?
Ben, if you have a question, you can go ahead.
Thank you. So I was just wondering, just a quick question, and then I have some other points to get into, but when are we voting to approve this policy?
Kaylee could probably answer that. From what I know is that it would be at the next board meeting to give you some time to review the policy, but again, Kaylee can answer that. Is that okay, Kaylee, that you can answer that afterwards?
We were thinking of doing what we did last year when there was a policy approval. So Lynn came, she kind of introduced the document, went through the changes, and then the board can have the full month to go through it. It's 12 pages long. It's quite detailed. So take your time, read through it, and then we can come to the next meeting, have a discussion on any points, and then approve it then.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ben, for the question. Do you have any other questions?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for the work on this. And I was going through it, and there was just a couple things that I did want to discuss now, just while you're here. So first is the definition of active membership. So I noticed that because it doesn't include events or activities, that might be very difficult for all clubs to kind of conform to that model. So my recommendation would be that the percentage or whatever it may be essentially decided by the clubs themselves to include in their club guide or constitution, essentially, because some clubs might only have like 2 meetings and then the rest be events, and that would be difficult for that 70% number to be applied. So that was my first recommendation, and I guess that would apply to 3A as well as later on 5E. And I think in part of that, it's in terms of there being a club guide, it used to be, the club constitution. I believe that the constitution is a stronger word. I just think that because of problems that, we've seen today and other reasons, individuals might perceive it, if it's just a guide, then we don't actually have to follow it exactly. There might be confusion there. So I think that name should also be, policy or constitution or something like that, right? And also in the definitions, can we just scroll down to the definitions section? Again, also for the in terms of 3G, so I believe that the deratification kind of should be like just basically closer to the ratification definition, because when it says like activity status, I think that's a little vague, and I think it should be like the opposite of what ratification is. So the removal of a club's status as an official BUSU club. So that's one other recommendation. And then in terms of the GSA member, I think it would clarify if we have a definition for BUSU member and GSA member, and have those be in and of themselves not not specifically referring to somebody in a club, because we have a definition of a club member. So like here, the GSA member definition is somebody who's in the GSA and actively participating in club activities, but outside of this, outside of clubs, somebody doesn't have to be involved in clubs to be a GSA member. And again, it's just for those to reduce confusion, so that people don't take definitions that are consistently used in other policies and then confuse it here. So for example, 3J could read, how it is, except removing that last part where it says actively participating in club activities. And then if somebody is a GSA member and they're a member of a club, that would clarify for those who might otherwise misconstrue those two things. So yeah, those are some recommendations. Now, can we please scroll to number 16? Because it was just about the supports available at Brock. I see that it mentions like HRE specifically for like 16C, but as you mentioned, like there's also other supports through student life and so forth. So I believe that should be like simply made more general to issues beyond the scope of this policy will be directed to supports at Brock University. Which could include HRE, student life, whoever might also be available to best support the club. And then the last thing that I'll just bring up while you're here is in terms of the in terms of the club funding, because as you previously know, there used to be the rule where BUSAC would approve club funds over 1,500, and then so things have changed since then. But what I would recommend is there being a number such as up to 3,000 maybe, around there, where if a request is over that amount, that it would come to the board for approval. So that was just my last recommendation. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, for all those points. I have noted them down, but if you could bring them forth to your next board meeting, just so I collectively have recommendations from the board, it'll make it easier to adjust the policy as needed. Carly, you had a question in the chat. Oh, thank you, Ben. Um, is there a definition for a meeting versus an event? I didn't include it. However, I can for further clarification, because some clubs only ever have meetings versus some clubs only ever have events. But either way, meetings and events need to be risk managed. So that's why I always specify both. So if a definition for both should be included in the policy, that can definitely be added in there as well.
Does anyone else have any questions for Solen?
That is a good point, Carly. So this is still a gray area because with removing the membership fee, it makes it harder to define who is allowed to vote or not. However, it doesn't make sense to charge a membership fee. So in terms of really defining what is an active member, I put forth what I thought was best. However, I don't know everything about clubs and or their daily operations, as I'm still learning every day. And so any suggestions from the board would be greatly appreciated. I just didn't think that saying only, if clubs only attend events, they might not know about the general operations of the club, so it wouldn't make sense for them to vote. However, in the case, if they only do ever have events, then that is the only basis that they're going off of. So I guess there's a lot of what ifs that would be attached to active member that I could go through an exhaustive list of all these what ifs in different scenarios and then define what an active member is, but I don't know if that would be beneficial for the policy. Yeah, so any thoughts and recommendations, I definitely welcome them and encourage them when you review the policy at your next board meeting.
Yasmin, you can go ahead.
Hello, Solen. First of all, thank you so much for that presentation and for taking the time to sit with us here today. We went over this together like a few weeks back, but I don't know, I just thought of this for some reason, which is why it's really good to kind of like have these discussions. You mentioned that undergraduate students pay a fee per credit for clubs, but I was wondering, do we think we might want to only charge, for example, graduate students or like members that are from the regular community? So that way we can kind of ensure that it's like equal. So like if you're an undergraduate student, you wouldn't have to pay a fee. But if you're a graduate student joining a club, or if you're just a member from the community, maybe you would pay a small fee and make that mandatory just so it's equal. That's just also something that I thought of. So I was wondering what everyone's thoughts were, and maybe yours as well.
And that is a great point, something that I hadn't considered. My only question would be is where would you set that minimum fee? And that's also something I'd have to talk with GSA to see if that is something that they're okay with. And would these funds be managed through the club, or would they be managed through GSA? I guess there's a lot of logistics when it comes to if we're collecting that money specifically for graduate students and or community members, where is that going? Versus the undergraduate student fees comes directly to BUSU, so it's easier to manage that way. The standard club fee in the past policy was anywhere between $3 to $20 per member maximum. So I guess that was established like in the 2017 policy. I'm not too sure exactly why the $3 minimum, but that is definitely something I would consider and talk with GSA about to see if that's something we can do. At least that can also give them funding for their club activities.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Any other questions or comments for Celine? All right, well, thank you, Celine, for the presentation. Much appreciated, very detailed. We will now move on to item number 8.
Can you just make me host again before you leave?
Yeah, I was going to say that. I need to do that. But thank you, everyone, for listening to me speak about the policy. And oh, did I make it? Did I make you the host? Oh, wait, no, I didn't. Sorry. Yes, there we go. Yeah, so thank you, everyone, for your suggestions and your feedback. And again, if you could just encompass it in a larger document for me to review in a month's time, that would be great, just so I don't forget anything. But I have made note of everyone's recommendations, and I appreciate your feedback. It's only going to make the policy and the club system better. Okay, have a good night, everyone, and take care.
Thanks, Lynn.
Oh my God, my Wi-Fi is so bad. All right, moving on to Ben and the board transparency plan.
Thank you. So one thing is that I believe there was just a couple of changes that we have to make it compared to what was in the portal. But in terms of the approval, I'm just hoping that like we're at a point where we're comfortable to approve this. And yeah, I guess, did anybody have any ideas that have come to them but haven't been able to put them in the Word doc that Kelly circulated?
I guess I have one question about the second point. So it says posting meeting agenda minutes and recordings within a week of the meeting. So we typically post minutes once they've been approved at the next meeting. So how would you like to address that?
Yeah, so I guess, I put in the brackets about only approved minutes obviously being posted, so that, within the week of that, the meeting in which it's approved. So I guess one way to simplify that is to simply say that they're posted in a timely fashion, and then put as an example within a week. And then for cases where minutes need to be approved, then a timely fashion would be very shortly after they're approved. That's one way to. Does that make, like, do you think that'll work, Kaylee?
Yep, that's fine. I think I can just reword it a little bit, but I know what you mean.
Okay.
Hannah, you can go ahead if you have something to say.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, this is a bit tedious, but the place I'm working for, their board, if like the meetings are kind of spread out, they'll have another meeting like the following week, literally just to approve the minutes from the previous meeting. So I mean, if there's a way, yeah, just to circulate through email or something, that would be good.
Yeah, we can do that by email if you guys want. Sorry, I'm speaking out of turn, but we do post the recordings fairly soon, like a day or two after they happen. So those do go up fairly quickly.
Austin, if you would like to speak, you can go ahead.
Well, what is, I'm thinking about the, like last year, or like in just general, trying to do votes online, it's a bit of a pain to try and do that. What if we just have it stated that anytime minutes are approved in a board meeting, that it has to be posted within that week of it being approved? Just so we don't have to go through the whole process of having to vote through email every single board meeting right afterwards.
So Chair, if I may, what we could do to clarify that perhaps is just have that one line separated into two lines so that, you know, the agenda and recordings will be like that. And then the minutes can have its own line where it says meeting minutes will be posted, you know, no later than a week after being approved.
Austin, is your hand up from before, or would you like to speak again?
Like the end, sorry.
Does anyone else have any other comments or questions for Ben? Can you hear me? I swear to God, this Wi-Fi is pissing me off. Carly has a question in the chat. Is there a reason minutes aren't approved at the end of the meeting? Kaylee or Robert, do you have an answer to that?
Why there, we just usually circulate, that's the standing motion at each meeting, is to approve the ones at the previous meeting. So it gives everyone a chance to read the document, since it's not always shared on screen. And when we meet in person, it won't necessarily be on screen the whole time. We'll just kind of be following along, and I'll be making the minutes myself.
All right, so if there's no other questions, I guess we can move to the motion, right?
I did have them together. If you want to look at the other document first.
Yeah, if we could go back to the, Ben, do you have something to say? You can go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, just before it's approved, one thing that I just think for this to be posted on the website, and so that would be in the motion. And because it would be posted on the website, just to make the points, you know, consistent, saying that, you know, the board shall, or BUSU shall, and just adjust the language slightly. So that's the only thing that I would just add to polish, as long as the board is okay with that. Thank you.
Austin, you can go ahead.
Sorry, I'm struggling to mute. I fully support the yearly plan. Someone let me know if not, but whatever. I also think that what this plan is needs to be adjusted. So maybe instead of annual plan, we say we have this as a starting point and task the general manager or their designate to flesh out the idea a bit more.
Well, that cut out a lot for me. I hope it. Ben, would you like to touch on what Austin just suggested?
So I believe that in the agenda, a similar motion kind of going along with that was to task Robert to have this kind of implemented with the board policy or something like that. I mean, doing the transparency plan and so forth is within the policy. And so, you know, the operational side of it, of him carrying that out, as Austin was saying, I think is going to be covered in that motion. So, but I'll hopefully Robert can clarify that.
Robert, would you like to go ahead?
I'm confused on what I'm looking to clarify. I mean, if, for example, if the board says, hey, you want me to polish this, I'm be happy to do so. If the board approves it, I'd be happy to carry out at least the staff portion of it. I'm not certain what you would want me to do. So I need a little bit more clarity then.
Yeah, so just in terms of the motion that was on the agenda. So is that available, Kaylee, for you to pull up?
Yeah, that was just it. You didn't have a motion, so this is just what I put together, but you guys can change it if you want to.
Yeah, I'm okay with what's there. So be it further resolved, board tasks Hilson with incorporating both documents into policy. So I believe that is putting that, on Robert to flesh things out. But maybe we can, just clarify that, be it further resolved. Board tasks Hilson with perhaps, expanding on the documents and in conjunction with, I don't know, perhaps Kaylee. But I'm just looking for the action word aside from incorporating. So it could be perhaps expanding upon or something like that. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
And through you, James, through you, Mr. Chair, James, or Ben, thank you for the clarity. I make sense now.
All right, I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of confused too, mainly because it keeps cutting out and I hear half of what people are saying. But so we're moving ahead with these motions on the screen, right? Did anyone hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, we are. All right. So be it resolved, the board approves the BUSU board transparency plan. Ben, as the mover, do we have a seconder?
Sorry, James, I wrote these all as one motion, so be it further resolved, so we can do it all in one vote. Just to
Boom,
make it
be
easier.
it further resolved, the board approves the board yearly plan. Board tasks Robert Hilson with incorporating both documents into policy 102. And Austin as a seconder. All right. All those abstaining? All those against? All right, I think we can assume that it is unanimous. All right, moving on to item number 9. We need to move in camera, so do we have a mover to move in camera? Yasmin and Mark. All those against moving in camera. All right, unanimous. You guys can still hear me okay? Okay, great. Wi-Fi is being a little nicer to me now. Kaylee, can you pull up the documents?
Yeah, I'm working on it. My computer is suddenly very slow, but it's coming.
Technology, am I right? How fun.
It's just done with this meeting. Oh, hold on. We are in camera. I'm going to stop recording.